The baby cried like wind against tin, thin, dry, and desperate. Jed Ramsey didn't remember the last time it had stopped. Maybe back at the creek, 2 days ago, when the fever hadn't set in yet. Or maybe not even then. He rode into the edge of the town just past noon, his coat stiff with dust, lips split, boots wrapped in cloth to keep them from coming apart. He wasn't a beggar, not by nature. But nature had taken too much lately to let pride stay whole. The baby stirred in the sling across his chest, face flushed red, eyelids fluttering like weak moth wings. Jed didn't look down. He couldn't. If he met that gaze, those black glass eyes so much like her mother's, he might break apart for good. The town was no more than a sprawl of sagging roofs and blistered signs, caught between drought and some slow death no one had named yet. He passed a church with boarded windows, a saloon with no swinging doors, and a sheriff's post with dust an inch thick on the badge nailed to the post. No sound but a creaking weather vane and a dog barking somewhere behind a fence. Jed dismounted stiffly, his legs untrustworthy. His horse barely moved, ribs sharp beneath its hide. He tied the reins to a rail and walked toward the first door. A knock. Quiet, then louder. Silence. The second door opened a crack. A woman peered out with a rifle braced to her hip. "Don't need no tramps," she said before he could speak. "I got a baby," he said. The woman looked. The sling. The flushed face. She closed the door. He knocked again. "I got nothing left," he tried. "Please. I ain't a skin, 4 silver. Just milk." The silence that came back wasn't just refusal. It was fear. By the time he reached the 5th door, Jed's voice had cracked. The 7th, he'd dropped to one knee. By the 8th, he'd stopped speaking altogether, just held out the baby and let the cries speak for him. No one answered that one. He didn't blame them. He sat on the edge of the well in the center of the square, baby curled against his chest like a dying bird, and watched the sun crawl toward ruin. Somewhere in the saddlebag was a tin cup and 2 dried corn husks. He could boil them again. Fool himself into believing there was broth in it. A child peeked at him from behind a curtain. Someone hissed for her to get away. The baby whimpered again. Not loud now. Too tired. Just enough to break his heart clean down the middle. "You shouldn't be here," said a voice behind him. It wasn't cruel. Just worn out. Jed turned. A man leaned against a water trough, older, lean, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked at the baby with a farmer's eye, measuring fever and age in one glance. Then looked back to Jed. "You a vet?" "Fought, yeah," Jed rasped. "Where?" Jed paused. "Tennessee. With the Gray." The man gave a small nod. "Folks here lost kin on both sides. Best you keep that to yourself." "I'm just lookin' for help." The man's eyes stayed on the baby. "Town's dry. Folks are scared. Ain't been rain in weeks. Coyotes come down Main Street at night. Ain't nothin' left to share." Jed tightened his grip on the baby. "There's always something." The man shrugged. "Try the boarding house. Widow there had milk last I heard. Ain't friendly, but she's practical." Jed thanked him, stood, staggered a little on his bad leg. The man caught his elbow. "You got a name?" he asked. "Jed Ramsey." The man nodded. "Then go quick, Jed Ramsey. Sun sets fast here. And some folks don't like strangers walking free after dark." The boarding house sat near the end of the street, its porch sagging like a drunk's grin. He climbed the steps and knocked. Once. Twice. A third time. The woman who answered was tall, square-shouldered, and pale as a ghost. She looked him over like he was a stain. "I got a baby," he said. "I see that. She's sick. Got a fever. I need. No room. No charity. You best keep moving. I'll work. Chop wood. Clean. Sell my boots." The woman glanced down. "Them boots." Jed said nothing. "I ain't got time for men like you," she muttered, and slammed the door. Jed didn't move. He stood there, hands still raised, staring at the worn wood. Then something shifted behind him. A change in air, like breath drawn in. He turned. Across the road, beside the blacksmith shop, a figure stood still as iron. A woman. Skin dark as riverstone, wrapped in a faded cotton shawl, with a child on her hip. Her eyes didn't flinch from his, not even when the baby began to cry again. She stepped down off the stoop and walked toward him, her steps soundless in the dirt. She didn't ask questions. She didn't speak. She stopped in front of him and reached out. Jed hesitated. Something in him reeled against it, against giving up control, against the judgment in every door slammed before her, against his own shame. But then his baby whimpered again, and he handed her over. The woman shifted the baby in her arms with practiced care, pulled the shawl tighter around them both. Then, without a word, turned and walked back across the road. Jed followed. He didn't know her name. Didn't need to. The way she walked said everything. Not haughty. Not scared. Just steady. Like someone who'd carried things heavier than sorrow. Behind the blacksmiths, the woman ducked into a low room with cracked clay walls and a single oil lamp. The air inside smelled of herbs and wood ash. Her toddler, silent, big-eyed, climbed onto a cot and watched as the woman sat, adjusted her dress, and brought the fevered child to her breast. Jed stood frozen in the doorway, hat crushed in his hand. The baby latched on with a weak gasp. Swallowed. Then again. The sound hit Jed like thunder in a canyon. The woman didn't look up. Didn't say a word. Jed stepped inside slowly, eyes not leaving the small, miraculous movement of his baby's jaw. He sat on a stool by the door, back straight, every muscle wired tight. Outside, the wind shifted. A shutter banged. Somewhere in the dark, a dog howled. Still, the room held. After a long time, the baby stopped nursing and fell asleep in the woman's arms, head tucked against her collarbone. She didn't move to hand the child back. Jed opened his mouth, closed it, cleared his throat. Thank you. Still no answer. He looked at the toddler, who was falling asleep curled around a stuffed crow made from old shirt scraps. You got a name? He asked quietly. The woman didn't look at him. But her voice finally came, low and quiet. Martha. Jed nodded once. That's a strong name. She didn't reply. Outside, night gathered its weight. The wind had teeth in it now, and the stars began to prick through the black. Jed leaned back against the doorframe. He didn't ask to stay, and she didn't ask him to leave. But when the baby stirred and whimpered again, Martha shifted to cradle her closer. Then she laid the baby beside her own daughter, reached for the shawl, and tucked both in like they belonged. Jed closed his eyes, breathed in the scent of sage and old wood, and listened. For the first time in days, the silence did not sound like a death. It sounded like a beginning. The baby slept between them, small chest rising and falling with the hush of a breath no longer jagged by fever. Jed sat still on a stool by the hearth, boots off, hands raw from gripping reins too long. He hadn't meant to stay. But the night stretched long and silent, and Martha hadn't said a word after feeding the child. The room held the warmth of banked coals and old sorrow. Dried sage hung from the rafters, brushing the ceiling like ghost fingers. The clay walls glowed in firelight, rough and uneven. A chipped basin of water rested beside a folded linen cloth, stained with milk and sweat. Everything in the space was used, purposeful, worn the way a good saddle gets worn. Jed shifted. His back ached. He was used to silence. He'd kept company with ghosts ever since his wife died, but this kind wrapped around him like a question, not an absence. He couldn't decide if Martha's quiet meant welcome or warning. She sat on the cot beside her daughter, back straight, eyes half-lidded in the flicker. The child curled at her side, a thumb in her mouth. And Jed's baby, his son, though no one had yet said his name aloud, lay in the space between, bundled in a quilt stitched with threadbare flowers. You live alone? Jed asked. Martha didn't answer right away. Then, no one really lives alone. Just people forget how to see. He nodded like he understood. He wasn't sure he did. You married? He asked, gentler this time. Her eyes flicked to him. Not sharp, just weighing. No. He didn't ask if she'd ever been. Some things didn't need names to be real. He glanced at the toddler, then down at the hands folded in Martha's lap, broad, strong-knuckled, stained with ink or ash. She wasn't soft. But she had given his son life again. "I can fix things," he said. "If you need." She raised a brow. "Fence. Roof. Dig a new trench. I don't mean to be dead weight." A pause. Then, "The gate's been dragging. I'll see to it tomorrow." He almost smiled. She didn't. The wind howled outside, sharp and sudden. The baby flinched in sleep. Martha reached out, laid a hand on his belly. Her touch was steady, unflinching. Jed found his throat tightening. "You didn't ask his name," he murmured. "I figured he'd tell me if he wanted it said." He stared at her, something tugging beneath his ribs. "Eben," he said finally. "Short for Ebenezer. Her father's name. She chose it." Martha didn't nod, but her gaze softened just slightly, and her hand remained where it was, protecting something not quite hers. Jed leaned forward, elbows on knees. "She died 3 days after birthing him. In a storm. I had to bury her in the dark with a broken lantern." Martha's eyes didn't flicker. "No doctor would come," he added. "Not for her." Still no reaction. But her jaw clenched, and Jed knew the story wasn't new to her. Just familiar in a way that went deep and sour. "She was black and Comanche. They wouldn't sell us land near town. We settled too far out. Got sick. I rode all night for milk before the fever came on. When I got back—" He rubbed his face with both hands. "When I got back she was already cold." Silence again. But not empty. Something unspoken filled the space between them like smoke. "I don't want your pity," he said suddenly. "You didn't get any." He looked up. Martha's expression was unreadable, but not cruel. "I fed your boy. That's not pity. That's a debt paid forward." He didn't ask what debt she meant. Didn't feel he had the right. Later, after the fire dropped low, Martha stood. Jed reached for the baby, but she shook her head. "He sleeps better with weight near," she said. "He'll wake if you move him." He hesitated, then let his hands fall back to his lap. Martha stepped to the door. "You can take the barn. I don't mind the floor." "It's not about what you mind. It's about what's good for the child." He nodded. There was no arguing with that. In the barn, Jed laid himself down on a bed of hay and old wool sacks. Moonlight crept through the slats like silver knives. His horse dozed in the far corner, tail flicking. Crickets chirped low and slow, like a lullaby spun in reverse. He stared at the rafters, unable to sleep. In his chest, a hollow pulsed where grief used to be hot. Now it was cold. And too quiet. The baby had lived. He should have felt thankful. But some part of him still burned with shame. He'd begged. Fallen to his knees. Offered up all that was left of his manhood for milk. And every door in town had turned him away. Except hers. He didn't know why that mattered so much. The next morning, the air smelled of dry earth and rain that didn't come. Jed rose before dawn and found the old gate half off its hinge, the wood swollen and cracked. He worked in silence, sweat rising quick in the heat. The sun climbed slow, lighting the dust like gold. By the time Martha stepped out with both children in her arms, Jed had mended the slats and tightened the chain. She nodded once. That was thanks enough. Her toddler reached out toward Jed. He raised a brow. "What's her name?" "Ruth." He crouched slightly, offered a calloused finger. Ruth stared, then pressed her cheek to his hand without a word. "She don't speak?" he asked. "She listens," Martha said simply. By mid-morning, the sheriff arrived. Jed saw him coming down the road, a broad man with a low-set hat and a permanent sneer. The badge on his chest caught the light like a threat. Martha stiffened. She set Ruth inside the doorway and stepped out to meet him, hands at her sides. Jed followed, arms folded, staying near the fence. "Morning," the sheriff said. It wasn't one. "You got business?" Martha asked, not moving an inch. He looked past her. At Jed. At the house. At the sling where the baby now dozed against Martha's chest. "Town's uneasy," he said. "Word is there's trouble here. Outsiders. Stories. Some folks are saying you're taking in strangers." Martha didn't blink. "He's not trouble." Jed stepped forward. "I'm just passing through. Baby took sick. She helped." "That's her habit," the sheriff muttered. "Helping what don't belong." Jed's hand clenched. The sheriff looked him over. "You stayin' long?" "Long enough to get my boy strong." The sheriff spat. "Ain't no welcome here for half-bloods and war ghosts." Martha's voice dropped. "Then go back to where folks talk like that's still law." The man didn't move. His eyes were ugly, lingering too long on the baby. "You keep quiet, woman. You forget this town still buries its own." Jed took one step forward. "And I don't bury twice." The sheriff turned to him slow, measuring that. Then, with a little nod to himself, he tipped his hat to no one in particular. "You've been warned." He walked off with the sun at his back, dust curling around his boots. Jed let out a slow breath. Martha didn't speak, just stared after him until the dust settled. "That happen often?" Jed asked. "Often enough I don't flinch." He looked at her, really looked, and saw it, how much she carried in the slope of her shoulders, the stillness of her jaw. She was built like the land, made to survive fire and flood, and still grow something green. That evening, the baby cried again. A thinner sound now, but still high and restless. Martha moved with quiet skill, laying herbs in steaming water, murmuring to Ruth, lifting the baby with care that looked like instinct. Jed stood by the door, useless. "What do you need?" he asked. She looked at him. "Water from the well. Boiled. Clean cloth." He brought it. He didn't ask questions. Later, she sat by the hearth, holding the child against her chest. Jed said, "You've done this before." She didn't answer. "You had a son." She blinked slowly. "You ask questions like a man who thinks answers will make things easier." He dropped his gaze. "They won't." "No," she said. "They won't." The baby stopped crying. Jed watched, aching with something he couldn't name. The fire cracked once. A moth fluttered against the window. "I don't have a place to go," he said. "I figured." He looked at her. "Why'd you help me?" Martha turned her eyes toward the baby. "Because someone once helped me. Once." She laid the baby down beside Ruth, touched his head, then stood and faced Jed full. "I don't owe you. You don't owe me. But if you stay, you work. And you don't lie." He nodded. She moved past him to the door, paused, and said without turning, "Sleep inside tonight. It's colder than it looks." Then she was gone, leaving only the sound of breathing and fire, and the ache of what hadn't been said. Jed knelt by the sleeping children and laid his hand gently across the quilt. A flicker of warmth, barely there, but real. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like a man running from the grave. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd reached something worth staying for. The child's breath turned ragged just after midnight. A shudder rolled through his small body, and his fists clenched against the thin quilt. Jed jolted awake at the sound, half whimper, half silence, and moved to lift him. But Martha was already there. She pressed her hand against the boy's chest, then his throat, then cupped his cheeks with careful fingers. "He's burning again. I boiled the water, just like before." "It's not the water," she murmured. "It's deeper now." Jed saw the change in her, shoulders squared, jaw tight, the kind of tension that came not from fear, but from memory. She wrapped the child in the shawl from the wall, tucked dried leaves into the cloth, and grabbed a tin canister from beneath the hearth. "Where are you going?" he asked. To the river. Jed hesitated. You mean the creek near the fence? No. The old one. Sacred ground. South of the ridge. His stomach tightened. You think herbs'll do what milk and thyme couldn't? No, she said, already tying the sling across her chest. But I know that place. And I know he needs more than what I can give him here. Jed didn't argue again. He saddled the horse, wrapped Ruth in a blanket, and they rode under a sky that churned with stormless clouds. The trail wound through blackened grass and low gullies where wind whispered but nothing lived. They didn't speak. Ruth dozed in Martha's arms, her little face tucked close to the fevered baby. Jed rode behind them, watching her back, the slope of it steady and unshaken, like someone who had walked through fire and never looked down. They reached the old riverbed just before dawn. The water still moved, slow and shallow now, but ancient in its smell. The trees here bent low, and stone circles marked places no one named anymore. Martha stepped down and knelt by the bank. She scooped water with her palm, tasted it, nodded. Still clean. Jed helped build a fire, though the air was thick and wet. Martha crushed herbs on a flat stone, mixed them with the water, and began to chant in a low, foreign tongue. It wasn't English. It wasn't Comanche. It was older. What is that? Jed whispered. She didn't stop. Her hands moved in rhythm with her words, laying roots and powder onto a cloth soaked in river water. She pressed it to the baby's chest. His skin steamed where it touched. Jed reached forward. He's burning up. He has to, she said. It has to leave through sweat or lungs. If it stays inside, it'll take his mind. Jed looked down at the boy, eyes fluttering, mouth slack. I should have done something sooner. You did what you could. No. I waited for someone to fix it. You fed him. You healed him. I just stood there. Martha paused, glancing at him in the half-light. That's the lie they feed you. That men are only what they can protect. Sometimes love is the stillness beside the pain. He stared at her, trying to hold on to that. Ruth woke beside them, rubbing her eyes. Martha pulled her close with one arm, whispered something that made the child smile, even here. Jed watched, swallowing hard. You never said what happened to her, he said. Ruth's mother. She was my sister's girl, Martha said quietly. My sister bled out in childbirth. Same as your wife. He waited. I tried to get help, she went on. Rode to town. Banged on doors. Same doors you knocked on. Same silence. Different reasons. Jed looked away. I came back too late, she said. The baby was still alive. But barely. And no one would take her. So you did. I owed her nothing. But I took her. Jed nodded. His chest ached, not just from guilt, but from the weight of what he hadn't seen before. That's what this is about, isn't it? Why you helped me. It's not about helping, she said. It's about not letting the world do it again. The wind rose. The baby cried out, just once, but it was sharp, clear. A good sound. Martha reached for him. The fever's breaking. Jed felt something loosen in his spine. His shoulders sagged. He hadn't known he'd been bracing. The sun breached the horizon, golden light spilling across the grass. It hit Martha's face, caught the curve of her cheek, the wet line beneath one eye she hadn't wiped away. Jed stared at her like he'd never seen her fully until now. He needs a name, she said. I told you. Eben. No, she said. He needs a name here. One that roots him. Jed didn't answer. She cupped the baby's face. What was your mother's name? Ramona. And your father? Jed hesitated. John. Martha nodded. John. Jed blinked. That ain't a real. It is now. He didn't argue. They rode back in silence. The baby slept against Martha's chest, and Jed led the horse with a hand on the reins, Ruth tucked between them both. The morning was still, too still. Near the edge of town, they saw the blacksmith waiting. He didn't wave them down. Just stood in the road, arms folded, face grim. Jed dismounted, handing Ruth to Martha. "What is it?" The man spat. "Trouble." Jed's stomach dropped. "What kind?" "Couple riders passed through. One recognized you. Said you owed cattle. Said they was comin' back." Jed's mouth went dry. "They saw the woman," the blacksmith added. "Saw the baby." Jed glanced at Martha. She didn't blink. "How long?" "Tonight. Maybe sooner." Jed squared his jaw. "Then I'll be ready." The blacksmith raised a brow. "You sure you want to do that? This town don't fight for folks like you." Jed looked toward Martha. She hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. She was still as stone, eyes on the horizon. "We ain't a skin them two," Jed said. The blacksmith gave a short nod. "You'll need a place with cover. Firewood. Ammo." "I'll find it." He glanced at Martha again. "You okay stayin'?" She looked him in the eye. "I'm not leaving again." Jed turned back to the blacksmith. "Then we'll stand." They rode to the house in silence. The baby woke once, coughed, and fell back asleep. In the yard, Jed pulled the rifle from under the floorboards. Checked the chamber. Loaded 5 shells. He laid the weapon on the table and looked to Martha. "You ever shoot?" She nodded. "Once." "You any good?" She shrugged. "We'll find out." He almost smiled. They worked without speaking. Jed fixed the latch on the barn door. Martha gathered dried herbs and powders into jars. Ruth helped carry kindling. They moved like people who'd done this before, not together, but beside others who mattered once. By evening, the air grew tense, as if the land itself knew what was coming. No birds. No wind. Martha stood in the doorway, watching the sun lower. Jed approached, stood beside her. "You scared?" "No. You should be." She shook her head. "I've already lost everything once. Fear doesn't change what happens next." Jed looked at her, really looked, and saw not just strength, but something deeper. Resolve. "I'll take the first watch," he said. She nodded. "Then I'll take the last." He reached for her hand without thinking. She let him. Their fingers tangled, not in passion, not in promise, but in understanding. In the cradle, the baby stirred. A soft noise. Almost a laugh. Neither of them looked away. Smoke began rising on the horizon just past noon, thin at first, like a cook fire, but too steady, too slow-moving. Jed saw it from the barn roof as he nailed a final board across the loft window. He narrowed his eyes, squinting past the heat shimmer. Riders. 2. Maybe 3. He climbed down without a word, chest tight. The wind had shifted again, hotter, metallic. A fire line of consequence building in the dirt and air, and no rain behind it. Martha stood outside the cabin, her sleeves rolled, holding Ruth on her hip. The baby lay asleep inside, belly full, cheeks pink with health that hadn't been there days ago. She looked at Jed, and didn't ask. She already knew. "How many?" she said, low. 3, far as I can see. But there'll be more behind them. One has a badge. Not from here." She nodded. "Bounty. Maybe. Or cattle thieves. Doesn't matter." Martha kissed Ruth's forehead and set her gently on the cot inside. "She stays in the root cellar until it's done." Jed hesitated. "You ever kill a man?" "No," she said simply. "But I've watched men die." He loaded the rifle, the shells clinking soft in the chamber. "You still want to stand with me?" She turned to him, no tremble in her jaw. "No one else has. So yes, I do." Jed looked at her. "I was a coward once," he said. "Let a man take something that wasn't his, and I told myself it was survival. Told myself I'd come back for it. But I didn't. Not then. You came back now, she said. That's what matters. They worked quietly. Jed laid the trip line near the edge of the brush. Martha filled a tin with ash and powdered pepperroot, her old trick. He soaked the fence rail ends with kerosene. There would be no fancy defense. No cavalry. Only what they had, 2 hands each, a rifle, and a reason to live. By dusk, the sky bruised purple. A wind picked up, dragging grit and silence. Ruth slept below, wrapped in quilts. The baby cooed in his sleep, no longer fevered. Martha had hung the pouch of crushed herbs above him like a ward. Jed checked the rifle one last time, then walked to the porch. Martha followed, carrying her kettle of ash, lips drawn thin. They stood together, waiting. They heard the hooves first. 3 riders emerged, shadows pulled across the dying light. One wore a brown duster, shotgun slung across his chest. The second, a wiry man with gold teeth, grinned like he'd already won. The third was the one with the badge. Jed stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. "You're late." "Didn't come for the talk," said the gold-toothed one. "Just the cattle. You remember, Ramsey? 40 heads you stole from us in Dodge." "I stole nothing," Jed said. The man with the badge spoke next. "That child of yours, heard he's not white. That true?" Martha stepped forward then. Quiet. Her voice calm. "He's alive. That's what's true." The badge turned to her. "Don't remember asking you, woman." "You didn't have to," she said. "But I answer when I'm needed." Gold Tooth laughed. "Hell, this what you've been living with, Ramsey? She looks like she'd bite." Jed raised the rifle. "I don't care what you came for. You ain't getting it." Big words from a man alone. Martha took 2 steps down. "He's not alone." The man with the badge leaned forward in his saddle. "You really want to die for this?" "No," she said. "I want to live." The air stilled. Then Gold Tooth reached for his holster. Jed didn't wait. The rifle cracked once. Clean, controlled. Gold Tooth dropped sideways off his horse, a shocked expression on his face even before he hit dirt. The other 2 drew steel. Jed ducked, rolled behind the trough. Gunfire cracked against the cabin wall. Martha moved faster than Jed expected, tossed her tin of ash straight into the second man's face. He screamed, stumbled, blinded, swinging wildly. Jed stood up and fired. The second man fell backward, arm twitching. The badge held steady, aiming now. But Martha stepped between them, her voice suddenly calm, deadly. "If you shoot him, you won't get out of here alive." The man laughed. "You think I'm scared of you?" She held out her hand. "You should be." The man's eyes flicked, just for a second. And in that breath, Jed fired. The bullet hit the man in the thigh, knocking him from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, groaning. Jed walked over, rifle aimed. The man clutched his leg, bleeding heavy now. "Go to hell." Jed crouched beside him. "Already did. This ain't it." "You gonna kill me?" The man spat. Jed didn't answer. He looked to Martha. She walked forward, face unreadable, kneeling beside the man. "You ever held a fevered child?" she asked. He sneered. "Ever begged a stranger for mercy?" He didn't reply. Martha reached down, tore a strip from his coat, and tied it tight above the wound. Jed stared. "Why?" "Because we choose what kind of people we become," she said. "Even after." Jed nodded slowly. "Then we leave him for the desert." "No water," she said. "No mercy." They dragged him just beyond the property line. Left him under a mesquite tree, 1 bullet still in his pocket. Back at the cabin, the fire was low. Ruth had woken, quiet, clinging to the quilt with wide eyes. Martha knelt beside her, brushing her curls back. "It's over." Jed sat on the porch steps, blood on his shirt, hands shaking only slightly. "I thought I'd be afraid," he said. "You weren't," she replied. I still don't know where I go from here. Martha looked down at the child sleeping inside. Then maybe you don't have to go. Jed turned to her. You'd have me stay? You already did. He swallowed. I've got nothing. You've got a name. A boy. A chance to give him a better one. Jed blinked. You think it's enough? I think it's everything. He looked up at the stars beginning to crawl out of the sky. I've been so many wrong things, Martha. She sat beside him, close enough for warmth but not touching. Then be something new. He looked at her hand. Open. Waiting. Not demanding. Inside, the baby let out a soft laugh. Jed exhaled. At sunrise, he walked into town alone. The sheriff stood on the steps, hands on hips. A few townsfolk gathered behind him, wary. You caused that ruckus? The sheriff asked. Jed nodded. Kept it off your doorstep, didn't I? The sheriff squinted. You staying? Jed didn't flinch. She fed my son when no one else would. I'll build her fence. Plant her garden. Carry her name if she lets me. You got a problem with that? The sheriff stared. Then, with a grunt, he turned away. Jed walked home. The fire line had passed. What remained was ash, and a field ready for planting. The kind of ground only found where two worlds met, and chose not to burn each other down. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.